Hi, I'm Ben Ferguson, and welcome to your Amac Weekly News. First up, the Biden administration knows they won't win on vaccine mandates, so don't get distracted by their tactics, and I'll explain exactly why you shouldn't take the bait. Up next, the Biden administration's failure, only exacerbated by the Secretary of State Antony Blinken's horrific congressional hearings, where he was busted lying this week. We'll have that for you. And finally, Amac National Spokesman Bobby Charles is here to talk about what is going on in Afghanistan, and also a shocking new report out about the Joint Chiefs Chairman. But first, a quick reminder, if you haven't shared this video, share it right now. Your Amac Weekly News starts right now. I want to start today by saying something very important. The majority of you watching are against the government mandating vaccines. Should you be angry? Yes. But I also want to tell you this. Do not take the bait. Let me repeat that. Do not take the bait from Joe Biden and the White House right now on them wanting to get into a war of words with you on vaccine mandates. They know they're going to lose in court, and state by state, these vaccine mandates are going to fail. They know that states are going to sue, and they know that those states are going to win. They know that they don't have the right legally to mandate that you take a vaccine. They don't care. All they care about is their plan to distract you from what's actually happening in this country. They need a distraction right now from the free fall that is the Biden administration. Now, liberals are absolutely terrified that they're going to lose both the House and the Senate in the midterms coming up because of Joe Biden. So in response, they're telling the president and the vice president to get creative. They need an issue that returns America to the divided place it was before the free fall and before the election. They know the issue needed to create this division is a simple one: vaccine mandates. They know Republicans hate them, and they know that Democrats love them. Now, I'm talking about this to remind you to not lose sight of what we should really be focusing on, which is the economy, inflation, the job market, and the Americans left behind in Afghanistan. They want you to not be focusing on Afghanistan. They want to distract you from the fact that they just armed the Taliban with American weapons. They would rather have you focus on a vaccine mandate, which is what happened over the weekend. Joe Biden has a lower approval rating than Donald Trump did throughout his entire presidency. And they impeached him twice, and still his approval rating isn't as low as Joe Biden's right now. So all the Biden administration has to say at this point is, well, that it's trying to save American lives, right? While the evil Republicans are trying to kill you. I want to say it again. Don't worry about this issue. Don't get distracted by it, because they know their actions are clearly unconstitutional, and it will not stand up to the judicial scrutiny in our court system. Now, you may not believe it, but I'm going to prove to you that I'm right now. I'm going to use the words of these Democrats who are now telling you must get a vaccine, their own words, to show you that they already know that a vaccine mandate will not hold up. You're about to hear from the president, the vice president, Anthony Fauci, and the White House press secretary, among others, including Nancy Pelosi, who are all going to tell you in their own words, they know what they're mandating cannot happen.
We cannot require someone to be vaccinated. That's just not what we can do.
Needless to say, the right of women to make decisions about their own bodies is not negotiable.
No, definitely not. You don't want to mandate and try and force anyone to take a vaccine. We've never done that.
Our interest is very simple from the federal government, which is Americans' privacy and rights should be protected.
It is a matter of privacy to know who is or who isn't.
We don't want to be mandating from the federal government to the general population. It would be unenforceable and not appropriate.
Perhaps the federal government should step in and issue mandates, and if not, are you putting the needs of unvaccinated people ahead of the needs of vaccinated people?
Well, I think the question here, one, that's not the role of the federal government.
No, I don't think it should be mandatory. I wouldn't demand to be mandatory, but I would do everything in my power. Just like I don't think masks have to be made mandatory nationwide.
Now you understand why I'm telling you don't take the bait. Every Democrat you just watched acknowledged that it's not the job of the federal government to mandate vaccines. They said it's not something that they can do or will do. Now, in order to attempt to stop the bleed of the Biden administration, Biden has completely changed his tune.
First, we must increase vaccinations among the unvaccinated with new vaccination requirements.
Also, take a listen to Biden's response to a reporter's question on Republican governor reactions to his push for vaccine mandates.
Are calling your vaccine requirements an overreach. You are threatening to challenge it in court.
Have at it. Look, I am so disappointed that particularly some of the Republican governors have been so cavalier with the health of these kids.
Let's be very honest. This is the tyranny of the Biden administration. And obviously, we cannot let it distract us from what's really happening. Mark my word, a lot of corporations are going to go ahead and move forward with this before the court system comes out with their rulings. And they're private companies, so it will stand. Now, forget freedom and forget rights is basically what the White House is now peddling to this country. Once you get the vaccine, do you really think it'll matter that the courts say that these mandates are not going to happen or shouldn't happen or are going to be struck down? Probably not, because you've already been vaccinated at that point. This is all political theater. Now, the next question is whether you should or should not quit your job. I would say absolutely not. Instead, organize, just like the Postal Service did. Organize, stage a walkout, get a lawyer with other like-minded people at your job. Don't show up for work for a day or two, even call in sick. There are different ways to handle this, so don't take the bait from your employer either. It's time for us to stand up and fight back against these unconstitutional actions by the government and by corporations. And I'll remind you, if this was all about life and death, why did the President of the United States of America give a carve-out to the United States postal workers, more than 670,000 of them, to not have to have a vaccine mandate? It's because they organized. They're in a union. They like the president, and he said, okay, I'll apply all these rules to everybody else but you. Again, proof that if we organize, we can actually win. So since we know the mainstream media won't fact-check anyone in the Biden administration, we're going to do it instead. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was questioned by both the Senate and the House about the absolute disaster in Afghanistan. Now, during the questioning, Blinken actually claimed that the Trump administration did not leave them a plan for withdrawing from Afghanistan. Watch this question by Democratic Representative Brad Sherman and look at Blinken's response.
Did we have a plan to get Americans from all over Afghanistan to Kabul and out in an orderly way? How meticulous was the planning for the Trump administration declared May 1st withdrawal?
Thank you, Congressman. We inherited a deadline. We did not inherit a plan.
So no plan at all. It's amazing that it wasn't much worse.
What you just witnessed is a lie. It's absolutely false, and every fact checker out there knows it, and they could have fact checked it. Of course, they didn't, because this is the guy in the Biden administration. So here are the facts. Former Trump Pentagon Chief of Staff Patel actually said on the record, and also wrote in an opinion article, that he handed over the Trump administration's withdrawal plan to the Biden transition team. Patel also wrote that everything changed when Biden declared forces would leave by September the 11th, 2021, but did not condition the withdrawal on continued adherence to the agreed upon stipulations under the Trump plan. Now, this is not the fault of President Trump or the Trump administration, no matter how many times Biden officials lie to you. Rather than accepting responsibility, Biden and members of his administration continue to claim somehow that Afghanistan was a success based on the hand they were dealt. Now, Senator Ron Johnson called Secretary of State Anthony Blinken out during the Senate hearing, saying this.
Mr. Secretary, if I were just to read your testimony, not having watched any news, I would literally think this was a smashing success. But I do read the news, as most Americans do, and we realize this was a complete debacle. And I think what concerns me the most, among many things, is that detachment from reality. It's the same denial of reality, for example, on the border. A self-inflicted wound, a crisis created by President Biden's policies that have completely thrown open our borders, and yet the administration denies that we have a problem at the border.
Senator Johnson is absolutely right. He should resign. And to make new calls for Blinken's resignation even more valid, I want to play for you his response to a question, a simple question about how many legal U.S. permanent residents are still in Afghanistan. He can't even answer that basic question.
We don't have an exact number, but it's in the thousands.
Pardon?
In the thousands.
In the thousands.
Blinken's leadership is nothing more than a total dumpster fire. I want you to hear Blinken's response to the question of what the dollar value is for the American weapons the Biden administration literally gave over, left behind for the Taliban. Again, more lies or no answers for the American people with accountability. Take a look.
Senator, I believe the equipment provided over the last a little less than 20 years, 15 years, was about $80 billion. Of that equipment that remains, as you know, it was given some handed over to the Afghan security forces. And, of course, some of that is now in the hands of the Taliban.
If there's any senator, by the way, that questioned Anthony Blinken that should get a medal, it's got to be Senator Rand Paul. Senator Rand Paul is not having any of the BS that's being laid down from the Biden team, the Biden administration, the State Department, the Pentagon. Here's part of what he had to say about all of this.
I've advocated for an end to the Afghan war for over a decade. I'm glad it's finally over. But never in my worst nightmares could I have imagined that an administration would leave $80 billion worth of weaponry to the Taliban. Dozens of planes and helicopters, thousands of armored carriers, hundreds of thousands of automatic weapons, and worst of all, 13 of our brave young men and women. Never in my worst nightmares did anyone or conceive of such a colossal incompetence. Abandoning Bagram Air Force Base will be remembered as one of the worst military decisions in our history. Holding no one accountable, having everyone circle the wagons and say, hey, we all agreed abandoning Bagram Air Force Base was a great idea. This is going to be remembered by the people. Holding no one accountable for letting the base go, it will be remembered. To add insult to injury, this week you've now released $64 million in aid to Afghanistan. Don't we have some prohibition against giving aid and comfort to the enemy?
There only seems to be one consistent theme left for the Biden administration when it comes to Afghanistan. It's in the midst of this crisis. You just got to blame Trump for everything. That's it. That's it. It's all Donald Trump's fault. That's what they want you to believe. The facts are it's not Donald Trump's fault. The Biden administration decided to get out of Afghanistan at all costs, no matter how many Americans were left behind. And anyone with eyes or ears that is following this can clearly see this is the fault of Joe Biden and his administration. And it is time for the people working for the president, at the bare minimum, to be held accountable, to resign, to lose their jobs, or to be fired over the debacle, which is Afghanistan. Obviously, massive news coming out of the Biden administration. Headlines they don't want you to see. One dealing with the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, lying to Congress about the exit plan from Afghanistan. And then a shocking report from Bob Woodward saying that the Joint Chiefs Chairman was actually running a shadow government at the end of the Trump administration. Joining me now to talk about these shocking headlines is our very own Amac National Spokesman and former Assistant Secretary of State under Colin Powell, Bobby Charles. Bobby, let's start immediately with a guy in Blinken, the Secretary of State, that flat out lied to Congress this week saying we were given no exit plan. We were given no information about exiting Afghanistan. That is a lie, and we have proof of it in the documents that were left and the meetings that were requested from the Trump administration during the transition. And basically, the Biden administration said, you guys can go to hell. We don't want to meet with you. We don't want to talk to you. We don't want any of your documents. we've got this. Your thoughts on that first?
Yeah, I think what you're pointing out here, Ben, is a crisis of accountability in the leadership of the United States at the very top. And Blinken is emblematic of it. He's also somewhat unique in that that's only one of about a dozen misrepresentations that I think are really they're material, meaning they're very significant, and they're really something the American people should be worried about. I mean, I look at what they've said about how many Americans are left in there. The F-77 document, the mascot software, it all says that there were far more Americans in there than they're saying. The very fact that they'll put a number on the number of Americans in there when they don't know is really a misrepresentation. The fact that they would misrepresent to Congress everything from the existence of the plan to their own decision to abolish the evacuation bureau, to me, it really stinks. And I'll tell you, I have a personal insight on this, Ben, and I share it with some hesitation. I've known Tony Blinken for almost 40 years, 35 plus. I went to law school with Tony. I think he is a good human being, but I think he's in way over his head. And I think when you get in way over your head, you make bad decisions. You begin to backtrack on things you shouldn't be backtracking on, and you begin to say things you shouldn't say. And I think the problem we've got right now is that as a Secretary of State, he is not serving us well. And I have already called publicly, and I'm sorry to say it, but I have called for him to resign because I just think this is a complete, between the mismal and nonfeasance, this is a miscarriage of your responsibilities as a senior leader in the United States government.
Well, and you have people now from both sides of the aisle, senators and congressmen, basically questioning the incompetence of the State Department, Blinken and Biden. And I don't think this issue is going to go away for them anytime soon. I want to move also to another really important point quickly, because this shocking Bob Woodward book coming out, and the press is not denying that these phone calls, transcripts, and conversations actually happened, where apparently he went behind the back of the President of the United States of America, made phone calls to his counterpart in China saying, I'll give you a warning if we're going to attack. Don't worry, I'm not going to let it happen. And then also met with his generals after January the 6th and said on the 8th, apparently to them, per this book, this reporting, that you're not going to do anything on the chain of command without me being involved. I would argue this is treasonous. You have multiple congressmen and U.S. senators now saying that's exactly what this is. Your reaction, should he be fired or should he even be charged?
Well, as you know, I was 10 years a naval intelligence officer, and it certainly surprises me to hear things like that. To me, I see four things directly tied to this. The first is that there was a real hemorrhaging of respect for Milley internally during both administrations, and I think that's one of the reasons he was moving forward as fast as he was to protect his flank. I think number two, he was talking about being inserted in the chain of command where he doesn't belong in the chain of command. He's not even in that chain of command in terms of decision making on those issues. That belongs to elsewhere. The third is that he was really actually eliciting or soliciting general officers to, in effect, break the chain of command by reporting to him rather than reporting to the commander in chief. And I think finally, and this is the most egregious one, of course, going to an adversarial government. Can you imagine if a prime minister of Great Britain or a president of the United States had gone to our adversaries pre-World War II or I or during the war and said, "Oh, by the way, don't believe what the president's," if the equivalent of a chairman of the Joint Chiefs had gone and said to them, "Don't believe what our president has to say. We won't let anything bad happen." Obviously, that shows it's got multiple layers of failure in there. It's a personal failure. It's a professional failure. It appears to be soliciting people to do something outside the chain, but it's also much more significantly, in many ways, it's an aid and comfort to a foreign enemy at a time when you're subverting the chain of command. It's not only a constitutional issue internally, it telegraphs to our adversaries that the president of the United States will be preempted or will be subverted by his own government. So to me, it's very worthy of, again, this goes to the much higher issue. And Ben, I just want to say it this way. We have a crisis of accountability at the top of the government. Tony Blinken is indicative of failures at the State Department, incompetence. I personally think the president of the United States has failed to be accountable to the American people on a number of issues. I think you can see other cabinet members behaving that way, and now you've got a chairman of the Joint Chiefs behaving that way. This is why we don't have.
It's going to be very interesting to see what happens here, because there's been reporting out today, and I'll end with this, that is actually saying that people that were involved in these conversations and decision-making of Milley are willing to testify under oath, per White House officials, that not only did this happen, but he was instructing them to go outside the chain of command around the President of the United States of America. And I don't know how you undo this if you're Milley right now. It's going to be very interesting to see how many congressmen and senators call for accountability on this issue. But these two major issues clearly are not going to go away, certainly this week, from the Biden administration. I really appreciate you coming on AMAC Weekly News and talking about these important issues. And obviously, we are going to do everything here at AMAC to hold them accountable for these actions. That's it for this edition of your AMAC Weekly News. Very quick reminder, make sure, again, right now you share this broadcast with your family and friends on social media. Email it to them, the link as well. And if you haven't joined AMAC or renewed your AMAC membership, do it now so you can continue to receive not just this show, but access to our amazing member benefits, our AMAC magazine. And the other thing that's so important is you're joining now more than 2 million other conservatives as we fight each and every day on these important political issues. So make sure, if you're not a member of AMAC, do it right now. I'm Ben Ferguson, and I'll see you back next week for our next episode.